Welcome. The sun rises over the village like it always has, slowly, politely, and slightly behind schedule. No bells yet, no coughing, just chickens. Just dew. Just the smell of old bread and wet wool. It's a good morning to be alive. The cows are unimpressed. The pigs are busy being pigs. And in a cottage with a thatched roof, someone is about to learn that the soup they started last night has fermented itself into a sentient broth. This is not the story of kings. This is not the story of knights, banners, or glorious battle. This is the story of a village. Your village. One with 8 buildings, 14 families, 2 mildly suspicious monks, and 1 goat that everyone swears is cursed, but no one can prove it. Yet. It's the year 1346. And while you don't know it yet, but the wind has started to change. Before we go any further, please subscribe and like this video so we can get together again in a different journey into history. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you joining us from, and what time is it for you? Write it in the comments. It's always a joy to see how far and wide this strange, cozy little corner of history reaches. The village, nestled comfortably between a sleepy river and a forest that no one quite trusts, begins to stir. Not quickly, mind you. No one in 1346 does anything quickly unless there's fire involved or soup. Old Lothar, the shepherd, is the first to wake. He does not know he is the first. He assumes he is late. He always assumes he is late. His beard is older than most people in the village, and his knees make noises that might be medieval curses in sheep language. He wraps a bit of wool around his shoulders, mumbles at the door, and steps into the fog like he's arguing with it. Which he is. Down the lane, Bertha the baker is discovering, for the 6th time this week, that mice have absolutely no respect for flower boundaries. She sighs, lights the hearth, and begins muttering threats in dough. Children wake slowly. Some don't. They were never meant to wake early. The concept of morning is, to them, a punishment invented by parents and monks. Their revenge is noise, mostly squealing, occasionally climbing things that were not meant to be climbed. The church bell has not rung. Brother Matthias is still asleep. He is, in fact, dreaming of cheese. He will deny this later. Morning life in the village is a pattern worn smooth by generations. Open shutters. Yawn. Complain about the cold. Blame the goat. Tend the fire. Stir the pot. Wonder if the pot should be stirring back. Count your chickens. Realize one is missing. Blame the neighbor. It's always the neighbor. There is no school. There are no shops. There is no entertainment except gossip and the occasional traveling performer who gets paid in eggs and fear. But there is rhythm. There is survival. And there is, just maybe, peace. At least for now. The manor house watches the village from a small rise. It is not grand. It is not fortified. It is mostly draught. But it belongs to Sir Hugh, the local lord, whose main duties include looking solemn, nodding wisely, and staying out of the way. He is currently asleep in a chair, drooling slightly onto a parchment about grain taxes. His steward, Thaumlin, is already awake and pacing, composing a list of things that are definitely going wrong. Thaumlin is the kind of man who can find an emergency in a loaf of bread. The village doesn't dislike Thaumlin. They just avoid eye contact and sudden movements. By mid-morning, the fog lifts. The air is sharp with the promise of rain and manure. Geese scream at nothing. Carts creak. A child falls in the mud and declares war on gravity. The tanner curses the sky. The cooper curses the tanner. The pig doesn't care. Life continues. But not everything is normal. At the edge of the village, near the old shrine with the crooked cross, a dog sits staring at the road. He has not moved all morning. He's waiting. No one knows for what. Or who. A traveler passed through yesterday. That's not unusual. What was unusual was the cloak. Black, fine, expensive. and the cough. Nobody talked about it, but everybody noticed. Later that afternoon, old Milda, who knows everything because she invented knowing, pulls her shawl tighter and mutters, "The wind smells Italian today." Nobody knows what that means, but it doesn't sound good. Tomorrow, a rat will appear in the bakery. The day after, the goat will stop bleeding. By the end of the week, someone will cough and pretend it was just dust. But today? Today is soup and mud and chores and chickens. Today is the last day the village will be exactly like this, and no one knows. Not yet. By the time the sun reaches its lazy noonday perch, the village is humming along with all the predictability of a slightly broken wheelbarrow. That is to say, things are working, just not in any particular order. Children are shrieking. Chickens are plotting. The blacksmith is arguing with his anvil, and the anvil is winning. Bertha has finished her bread rounds and is now outside shaking a wooden spoon at a particularly arrogant goose. She will not win this battle, but she fights it daily out of principle. Brother Matthias has finally woken. He emerges from the monastery with eyes like stale pudding and hair shaped by sleep and divine indifference. He nods once to the sun, once to the sky, and immediately trips over the chapel step. It is, by all accounts, a holy stumble. The village bell rings out once, then twice, then a third time with the urgency of someone remembering they left the oven on. It is time for midday prayer. Or, more accurately, time for people to pretend to be praying while quietly thinking about lunch. Old Lothar is sitting on a rock, watching his sheep with the expression of a man who has both seen everything and deeply regrets that he has. "You know," he mutters to no one, "I remember when sheep had manners." A passing child pauses. "Did they?" "No," Lothar says, "but I like the lie better." In the fields, plows creak and hoes scrape. The soil is heavy and wet and full of potential potatoes and even more potential arguments. Sir Hugh eventually rises and peers out his window at his loyal subjects toiling away. He considers joining them for precisely 3 seconds before deciding that his presence might ruin their morale. Then he sits down and resumes doing absolutely nothing. All seems well, except for the sky, because it's just a bit too quiet, because even the birds are being polite. And somewhere far beyond the forest, beyond the hills, beyond the safe, knowable borders of the village world, a ship has docked, a barrel has spilled, a merchant has coughed, the wind shifts again, and the dog still waits. Back in the village square, the gossip is ripening faster than last year's turnip wine. Word spreads that someone saw the cloaked traveler whisper something to the priest. Others swear he sneezed onto a bag of apples. The apples are now being treated with suspicion, boiled twice, and stared at nervously. "What if it's a curse?" someone whispers. "Or a sign?" says another. "Or just a rich person being mysterious," offers Thumlin, who has appeared uninvited with a scroll titled Contingency Plans for Mild Panic. He is ignored. Afternoon brings the inevitable. Chores. Children gather firewood. Adults chop, haul, clean, sew, patch, bribe the pig to move. Someone is repairing a fence. Someone is regretting becoming the person who repairs fences. The goat escapes again. Bertha chases it with a ladle. The goose joins the chase out of spite. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbles like an annoyed god, deciding whether to smite something or just take a nap. By evening, the village settles into its slow descent toward sleep. Fires are banked. Stews are stirred. Stories are told, the old kind, about dragons. And knights, and someone's grandfather, who once saw a fish with human teeth. Old Milda insists the fish winked at her. Everyone agrees not to question her. A child asks, "Why don't we ever get dragons here?" Brother Matthias says, "Because they don't like the soup." Nobody laughs, but everyone smiles. Night arrives with a hush. Candles flicker behind shutters. The moon peeks down, pretending not to be worried. The wind stirs. The dog sleeps. And in the woods, something sniffs the air and scampers away. Tomorrow will come, but it won't come quietly. The stars are out now, sprinkled carelessly across the sky like a baker with poor aim. The constellations are familiar. The plowman, the snoring pig, the saint of mild regret, each one carrying 1,000 stories, most of them contradictory. Brother Matthias peers up and nods solemnly. "Ah, yes," he whispers, mostly to himself. The goat's tail is especially bright tonight, a sure sign of something. Behind him, someone coughs. Just once. The sound is so small, so forgettable. Just a flicker in the dark. Tomorrow, someone will start preparing extra bread for a traveler who will never arrive. But the dog hears it. His ears twitch. And somewhere, across the sea, another village lights its first funeral pyre. But this village, your village, still slumbers, still laughs in its sleep, still snores in harmony. Tomorrow, someone will feel a chill that doesn't quite leave. Tomorrow, someone will say, "It's probably nothing." And tomorrow, we begin. The first cough is never loud. It does not echo through the hills or shake the rafters. It does not startle the cows or interrupt the church bell. It is small, private, almost polite. But it is also new. And in a place where sameness is survival, newness is rarely a friend. Bertha hears it first. She is elbow-deep in rye flour, attempting to coax a reluctant dough into becoming something vaguely edible. Her oven hisses. Her spoon accuses. And outside her window, she hears the unmistakable sound of someone trying not to cough. Twice, then silence. She looks up, frowns, returns to kneading. The bread will not wait. But the sound nestles itself in her spine like a draft. Across the lane, old Milda frowns too, not because she heard the cough. She didn't, but because her bones have declared it an ominous day. They are rarely wrong, especially the left knee. Brother Matthias, oblivious, is busy blessing a bucket of potatoes. He claims it's a ritual. Most think he just likes potatoes. The goats are quiet. The pig, usually a reliable source of chaos, has not attempted to eat anyone's shoes all morning. The dog still waits by the road. By midday, someone else coughs. Then someone else. Always just once. Always just far enough away to be someone else's concern. And by sundown, the village has discovered a new form of gossip. Did you hear him cough? No, but Bertha said Milda told Thomlin that the blacksmith's boy sneezed twice. Well, that's different. Sneezing isn't coughing. But it's adjacent. My aunt once sneezed herself into a fever. Wasn't she allergic to bees? And hay, and people. The villagers begin to adjust their routines, subtly at first. A little more space at the communal well. A slightly longer pause before hugging. A hesitation before borrowing bread. The baker begins leaving loaves on windowsills instead of handing them off directly. The monk starts blessing his own robes hourly, just in case. Sir Hugh remains blissfully unaware. He has started a new project, writing a book titled Why the Grain Tax is Good for Everyone, A Knight's Perspective. It is mostly blank pages. And in the woods, just beyond where the dog's stare ends, a squirrel drops dead with no apparent cause. The first funeral is small. It always is. They bury the tailor's wife in the churchyard with 2 candles, a cracked bell, and one highly suspicious priest. Brother Matthias insists she passed of old age with a hint of melancholy, which sounds poetic until you remember she was 32 and recently won the village sack race. Bertha brings bread. No one eats it. Milda brings a story about a bird she once saw that foretold death. It was, apparently, quite rude. Sir Hugh sends a wreath of rosemary, mostly because it was growing too aggressively in his herb patch. The villagers go home quietly. Too quietly. Even the geese hold their opinions. That night, 3 more people cough. By morning, the baker has locked her shutters and started writing passive-aggressive notes to the mice. The blacksmith sharpens everything in sight, including a spoon. The children have stopped chasing the goat, which now looks annoyed by the lack of attention. And Thomlin, dear, worried Thomlin, has begun organizing his scrolls. He starts drafting a new document, contingency plan for a slightly alarming but probably temporary situation. Nobody reads it. Nobody wants to, because knowing would make it real. Even the wind seems to hesitate at the village edge, but the dog still waits. And now he's not alone. In the night, something moved down the road, not a rider, not a cart, just a shape, long and slow. No one saw it arrive. But in the morning, there are footprints, and one small bundle wrapped in silk. Eartha finds it first. She unwraps it. It's a mask, strange, delicate, shaped like a bird. Brother Matthias insists it's a blessing. Milda calls it a curse. The goat sneezes. The baker begins boiling everything. And the village, once so steady, so snug, starts to hold its breath. By the next market day, the village square is a ghost of itself. The stalls are up. The apples are bruised. The carrots look suspiciously like parsnips with dreams. But there's no shouting, no haggling. Only quiet nods and excessive caution. A few villagers wear scarves over their faces. Not because they know it helps. They just feel it might confuse whatever's coming. Brother Matthias tries to organize a prayer circle. Only 2 people show up, and one is the pig, who wandered in looking for oats. The blacksmith, now wearing 3 aprons for protection, has forged what he calls an anti-illness helmet. It looks like a bucket with holes. He insists it's cutting edge. Thomlin begins walking around with a tape measure, enforcing respectable distances. Nobody listens, but he feels better. His scrolls now include diagrams. Eartha's bread, for the first time in memory, goes uneaten. Old Milda stands in the middle of the square and declares, "It's in the air. I can smell it." "It's your onion necklace," replies the baker's apprentice. "Exactly," she says ominously. They're reacting. More funerals follow. Too many. Too soon. And yet no one says the word. The word that hangs just behind every conversation, every silence, every distant cough. Plague. Not yet. Not out loud. Because to say it is to invite it in. But the villagers know. And the dog, who once waited patiently by the road, has vanished. In the fields, the crops have begun to grow sideways. Or maybe it's just the farmer's imagination. Sleep has become a rare and unreliable visitor. Nighttime is now filled with sounds. Coughing, creaking, whispering prayers, and geese who seem just a little too quiet. Sir Hugh, having read none of Thomlin's scrolls, announces a good morale feast. It consists of undercooked parsnips, 6 spoons of mashed turnip, and a speech about resilience that ends with the phrase, "Also, please pay your taxes." No one claps. Brother Matthias attempts to ward off illness by walking in circles with incense. He accidentally smokes out the church mice. They retaliate by stealing his sandals. The children invent a game called Plague or Pollen. It involves sneezing on each other and guessing. It is quickly banned. The baker begins experimenting with garlic and vinegar, not in her cooking, but as air fresheners. Her cottage now smells like a salad that has lost its will to live. Milda makes potions. Nobody drinks them, but everyone nods respectfully. One of them turns the goat mildly purple for 3 days. It seems to enjoy the attention. The village slowly dissolves into odd routines. People wave from a distance. Gossip becomes more creative. Everyone knows someone who's been to a town where the whole street fell ill after eating a suspicious pear. No one trusts pears anymore. The mood is cautious, tense. yet still strangely ordinary, because in 1346, life doesn't stop. Not for rumors, not for fears. You still have to chop wood, carry water, curse the wind, and apologize to your bread for burning it. But you also start watching each other more closely. And no one is watching closer than the dog. Except now, he's at the monastery gate, watching the priest, who just now has started to cough. The monastery had always smelled faintly of damp stone, old wax, and the spiritual exhaustion of men who had not had a proper conversation with a woman in 20 years. It was, in its way, peaceful and musty, peacefully musty. Brother Matthias stood in the courtyard with a freshly lit candle and a questionable chant. He was not entirely sure what language it was in, but it had rhythm, and that was half the battle. Behind him, Brother Clement snored into a hymn book. The monastery was not known for its medical innovation. It was known for its beeswax, its incredibly detailed scrolls on the virtues of silence, and one incident with a possessed cheese that no one spoke of anymore. But when rumors began drifting into the stone walls about something dark moving through the villages, something wet, wheezy, and fond of door-to-door visits, the monks felt it was time to act, with a meeting. Brother Percival called it to order by ringing the emergency spoon. This was a bent bit of silver kept in a drawer marked Doom. 5 monks assembled in the refectory, bringing with them a wide range of ideas and 2 very suspicious herbal teas. "We must isolate," said Brother Tom. "We must pray," said Brother Godfrey. "We must find the dog," said Brother Matthias. Everyone paused. What dog? Matthias gestured dramatically toward the gate. Outside, in the shadow of the monastery wall, sat a large, patient dog with eyes like old parchment and a coat that seemed to collect the world's dust. "He's been watching me," Matthias whispered. "He knows." "Knows what?" "That the cough means something, that we're not alone, that the tailor's wife did not trip on a potato like they said." Brother Tom sighed. "We don't even know if it's plague. No one ever does. Not until it's too late." Brother Godfrey sipped the herbal tea. It tasted like regret and mildew. Meanwhile, Bertha was baking bread that no one would eat. The flour was good, the oven steady. But the village had grown afraid of crumbs. Some believed they could carry disease. Others just didn't want to be near Bertha's oven, which had begun making an ominous hissing noise. Possibly serpents. Possibly steam. Hard to say. The pig had taken to following her, perhaps in hope that someone somewhere would drop a meat pie. Bertha considered naming it, then reconsidered. Naming things felt dangerous these days. Across town, Sir Hugh was attempting to commission a mural of himself defeating the invisible sickness with a very large sword. The artist had only painted his boots so far, and already demanded hazard pay. And Brother Matthias had begun a correspondence with the dog. He left him notes. The dog did not reply, but he occasionally nodded. This, to Matthias, was confirmation enough. Within the monastery, things were shifting. Brother Clement began sleeping with a clove of garlic under each arm. Brother Godfrey barricaded the scriptorium with jars of pickled trout. Brother Percival started rewriting the Psalms to include helpful verses, such as, "Blessed are those who wash their hands and avoid communal spoons." The candle budget skyrocketed. So did the vinegar consumption. One monk, whose name was lost to time, and a particularly pungent ink spill, took to wearing a beak-like mask filled with dried herbs. He claimed it filtered the air. The others claimed he looked like a suspicious bird, planning tax fraud. Outside the monastery, the village began to change shape. Houses closed their shutters, paths grew quiet, gossip grew louder, and the funerals grew shorter. Sometimes it was just a bell and a name, sometimes not even that. And still, no one said the word, not in the monastery, not in the square. Not even when old Milda stood atop a barrel and declared, "It's the pestilence, you fools. The rats have been whispering it to me. They told her to lie down. She refused, because Milda was the kind of woman who could outstare a cow and once ate an entire turnip just to prove a point. In the scriptoria, Thomlin wrote furiously. He had finally given up trying to avoid the truth. The scroll now read, "Contingency plan for an outbreak of pestilence, probably involving rats, coughs, and an unusual number of onions." It included sketches. It included footnotes. It was very clear that Thomlin was unraveling. Meanwhile, Brother Matthias had taken to walking the village square with a bell, chanting, "Wash thy hands and beware the pears." The villagers mostly ignored him, but they did stop eating pears. The dog followed him for a time, then disappeared again. And when he did, someone else coughed. This time it echoed. The echo bounced down the well and up through the square, where 3 villagers stopped in their tracks and began quietly backing away from each other with the urgency of cats avoiding bathwater. Bertha dropped her basket of bread, which was symbolic more than tragic, since no one had been eating it anyway. A single round loaf rolled dramatically toward the well and stopped at the lip as if contemplating its existence. Brother Clement, who had been napping under a tree, jolted awake and immediately accused the son of being a conspirator. "It's always watching," he muttered, then pulled his hood down and went back to sleep. Sir Hugh declared martial law. No one listened. He did not know what martial law was, but it sounded authoritative and involved yelling, which he was good at. Thomlin revised his scrolls again. This time he added charts. Milda whispered to the rats, and the blacksmith began forging tiny metal crosses to wear as plague protection amulets. He sold them for 3 carats and a compliment. It was, in many ways, the most entrepreneurial he had ever been. The monastery closed its doors. The monks retreated behind their heavy wooden gates and began living off pickled fish, holy wafers, and whatever garlic they hadn't already tied around their ankles. Brother Godfrey started assigning everyone hygiene duties. Brother Percival appointed himself chief symptom noticer, and Brother Matthias sat at the window, scribbling down notes about the dog who had returned. But now he wasn't alone. Now there were crows, a whole line of them, sitting on the wall, watching, silent, like a council. Brother Matthias closed his notebook. He picked up his candle and whispered, "We're being judged by birds." Then he turned to Brother Clement and asked, quite seriously, if he'd ever seen a crow wearing a tiny crown. Brother Clement nodded, then sneezed, and everyone froze. To say that medieval villagers were suspicious of rats is like saying the sun is mildly enthusiastic about rising, a bit of an understatement. Rats had always been there, skittering, sniffing, stealing whatever wasn't nailed down, and even then, sometimes trying anyway. But now they felt ominous, as if they were carrying more than crumbs and attitude. Bertha spotted one near her flour sack and screamed so loudly that the pig head-butted her fence in confusion. Brother Matthias, upon seeing a rat perched contemplatively on the church pew, declared it a sign of judgment. "He's clearly here to audit our sins," he whispered. The rat blinked, possibly in agreement. But what could they do? There were no pest control agencies in 1347. There were cats. Yes, and rather judgmental ones, but most were too busy napping, glaring, or pursuing their own futile agendas. So the people turned, as they often did, to what they did best, inventing solutions with absolutely no medical basis. The first remedy was garlic, because of course it was. Garlic for breakfast. Garlic hung from doors. Garlic worn in amulets. Garlic rubbed on goats, who did not appreciate the gesture and expressed their disapproval through interpretive grunting. Bertha even baked garlic into her bread, declaring it anti-plague loaf. It tasted like a shoe, a well-meaning but chewy shoe. Then came vinegar. Buckets of it, bowls of it. People started carrying little pouches of vinegar-soaked cloth and pressing them to their faces dramatically, like medieval soap opera stars fending off scandal. Brother Thomlin wrote an entire scroll titled Vinegar, Nature's Answer to Doom, and tried to sell copies. The scroll was not a hit, but it did soak up a small puddle once, which was something. Sir Hugh declared his armor had been vinegar-proofed. He said this while standing ankle-deep in a barrel of pickled beets, insisting it was for morale. Meanwhile, Milda started burning herbs. All the herbs, at once. Her house looked like it had made enemies with the clouds. Then there were the charms. Crystals were popular, especially the kind that looked vaguely glowy in candlelight. Turnip root necklaces had a brief trend. One man tried attaching a leech to each wrist and claimed he'd never felt more invigorated until both leeches mysteriously disappeared and he fainted during a thunderstorm. A traveling merchant arrived selling pestilence-repelling socks. They were normal socks. But he wore a large hat and used the word alchemy a lot, which made it convincing. Brother Clement tried wrapping himself in layers of wool soaked in blessed wine. It was a terrible waste of wine and a fire hazard. But he insisted he felt protected by holy tannins. The villagers grew ever more inventive and increasingly fragrant. You could now identify someone not by their face or voice, but by their scent trail, cloves and sweat, sage and fear, vinegar and desperation. The dogs stopped sniffing altogether. The doctors, such as they were, began arriving from other towns, tall, mysterious, wearing those infamous masks with long beaks like stylish geese. It unbelievably looks both stupid and badass at the same time. Iconic. Children ran screaming. Adults mostly stared. The masks were supposed to keep them safe. They were filled with aromatic herbs, like lavender, mint, and possibly a few herbs stolen from Milda when she wasn't looking. The doctors came with treatments. Some bled people. Others prescribed mashed frog ointments. One particularly enthusiastic man recommended chanting, "Cleanse the humors," while hopping on one leg. He was last seen being chased by Bertha with a rolling pin. It was clear the plague didn't care much for rituals, herbs, or vinegar puddles. It arrived anyway, quietly, like the first cough. And so the people, exhausted, confused, and increasingly pungent, began to look for different remedies. Stories, hope, faith, laughter, even. Because if garlic couldn't save you, perhaps giggling at the blacksmith's failed attempt to make a pewter noseplug could. Perhaps healing came not just through medicine, but through not giving up. Through rituals that made no sense, but made life feel a little more under control. Through routines that gave rhythm to grief. And through the firm belief that someday the rats would get bored and leave. They wouldn't, but hope is funny like that. By early spring, the village had reached peak confusion. Brother Percival attempted to host a lecture on the mystical geometry of the bubonic triangle, which involved 3 potatoes, a broken compass, and a strong whiff of desperation. Only Melda attended. She brought her own stool and several loud opinions. Bertha had officially stopped naming her loaves of bread. She claimed it was for emotional distance. The bread responded by developing suspicious bubbles and an attitude. Sir Hugh decided the village needed a hero. Himself, he commissioned a song. It rhymed valor with collar and featured an extended lute solo meant to represent the battle between good hygiene and poor drainage. Meanwhile, Thomlin had reached stage 7 of quarantine madness, competitive scroll organization. He now used a color-coded ribbon system and hosted weekly scroll showings. Attendance was poor, but he awarded himself best in parchment. The monastery hosted a plague preparedness week, complete with banners, a candle maze, and a seminar titled How to Wash Your Hands Like a Saint. Brother Clement demonstrated. He got distracted halfway through and blessed a ladle. The dog reappeared for 2 days, then vanished again. but not before delivering what Brother Matthias swore was a meaningful look. It said, quite clearly, "You are not ready." Or perhaps, "I've just eaten your cheese." Hard to say. And still, they tried. They kept trying. Bertha kept baking. Milda kept muttering the herbs. Brother Thomlin updated his scrolls until they resembled a wallpaper catalog. Sir Hugh designed a flag for plague resistance. That was immediately ignored. Life went on, just strangely sideways. The bells rang less often, but they still rang. The goats were skinnier, but still dramatic. The people were afraid, yes, but they were also stubborn, mildly inventive, and sometimes very loud. And sometimes that was enough. It began with silence. Not the peaceful kind, like after a storm, but the heavy kind, like someone had taken a wool blanket, soaked it in sorrow, and flung it over the entire village. Even the goats were quieter. People had begun to speak in half-whispers. Funerals became more frequent, less formal, more painful. The priest stopped bothering with full Latin rites, and instead opted for a stern nod and a handful of dirt. It wasn't out of disrespect. It was efficiency. There simply wasn't enough time, nor enough priests, to give everyone a personalized send-off. Mourners learned to be brief. Grief became a fast-paced business. Bertha began using her bread oven as a memorial wall. She etched initials into the bricks between bakings. The bread still came out weird, but now it came out reverent. The pig, sensing the mood, stopped headbutting things. And yet, despite the grimness, daily life persisted in its awkward, stumbling way, because they had no other choice. People still tripped, still prayed, still failed to properly milk the goats, even tried to gossip, just to give each other some comfort of normality. But those moments were followed by someone immediately coughing and everyone else backing away like nervous crabs. Mourning was different now. You didn't wear black. You wore layers. The more layers, the more grief. And they wore many, many layers. This was partly symbolic, and partly because layers were good at hiding tears, sweat, and the disease. Milda began offering eulogies, not because anyone asked her to, but because she had opinions. Her most famous speech was for a man named Osric, whom she'd once borrowed a turnip from and did some awkward flirting in 1329. It was her first and last flirt, but many more turnips. Osric, she bellowed, was average in many ways, but he was tall, and that counts for something. She followed this with a poem about mud. She even shed a tear. Everyone clapped and cried after their loss, because what else could they do? The funerals became moments of strange community. People brought food, but no one ate. People brought flowers, but the bees were unusually aggressive. And people brought stories, small ones, funny ones, some probably made up. It didn't matter. Each story was an act of remembering. Even the exaggerated one where old Gerald supposedly fought off the plague with nothing but a spoon and stubbornness. He couldn't. But his spoon was passed around like a relic and kept as a memory for a long time. The children built tiny grave markers from twigs. The noise once children made, and made the neighbors annoyed, became a faint memory. The children left were silent. The adults lit candles and prayed to saints, to angels, to the vague concept of mercy. And Sir Hugh, ever the dramatist, wore full armor to a funeral and fainted halfway through from heat stroke. Brother Thomlin began compiling an official record of the departed. It was less a ledger and more a poetic meandering of those we miss and those we occasionally tolerated. He included doodles, one of a rat with devil wings, one of Bertha hugging her bread, one of himself, looking confused but determined, captioned, "Chronicler of Absurdity." The scroll grew long and heavy. So heavy, in fact, that Brother Clement offered to help carry it. He tripped immediately, and the scroll rolled down the hill into the pig pen. It was recovered. Mostly. Some names were slightly smudged, but they were still remembered. Milda started crafting tiny wreaths from whatever she could find. Thistles, stray wool, rosemary, and on one occasion, a suspiciously crunchy mushroom. These were hung on doors with solemnity and a faint squeak. Bertha took up the role of funeral baker. Her loaves now bore decorative slashes and flower dustings shaped like crosses, stars, or the occasional confused goose. Some believed they brought peace. Others just appreciated the extra salt. Meanwhile, the village children began holding mock funerals for toads and beetles, dressing them in doll-sized tunics and humming vaguely somber tunes. One child gave a speech so moving it made Milda weep and Thamlin write a ballad. At night, the village square glowed faintly with candles. They weren't organized or intentional, more like a scattered collection of tiny flames placed wherever grief had decided to stop walking. It looked, from a distance, like the stars had fallen down and gotten very confused. And through it all, the mourning never stopped, but it softened. Because perseverance was coded in those hardcore people of Middle Ages. Grief folded itself into daily life, like flour into dough, persistent, ever-present, and occasionally lumpy. And while the grief never quite left, neither did the absurdity. Because even in mourning, someone always managed to drop a candle on their boot, or sneeze into the memorial loaf, or loudly insist that the toad funeral was too long. It was, in its way, the most human thing they had left. Faith, like mead, came in many forms. Some took it seriously. Daily prayers, ritual fasts, careful chanting. Others brewed their own theology in the back of the barn with 3 spoons of superstition, a pinch of anxiety, and whatever was fermenting under the floorboards. Since the bells stopped ringing for weddings and started ringing for everything else. It had been weeks since the cough became not the best thing ever happened to someone. Let's put it this way. And with each passing day, the villagers found themselves turning to something, anything, that might explain the chaos and maybe, just maybe, bribe the divine into noticing. Brother Matthias held morning prayers on a stump now, because the chapel had begun to smell like onions and anxiety. He preached with wild eyes and enthusiastic finger-pointing. He once shouted so passionately, his hat flew off and landed in a bucket of turnip soup. No one retrieved it. Brother Clement took a different approach. He said nothing at all and simply sat in the chapel with his eyes closed and his eyebrows tense, as if he was trying to mentally wrestle God into listening. Sometimes he'd mutter something like, "Just one miracle," a small one. Meanwhile, Sir Hugh began designing new saints. Saint Agnes of anti-inflammation, Saint Garlic of plague, Saint Bartholomew the Broad. He painted crude icons of them on planks of wood and nailed them to various sheds around the village. Milda protested this desecration of theology. Hugh replied with a bow, a poem, and a shrug. The villagers liked the saints, especially Ethel. She began offering her socks. Then came the visions. Probably the isolation of curfews and quarantine started to take its toll. So they broke to curfew and got together to stay somewhat sane. If their doors wasn't locked from behind by the order of the Lord. Yes, some people held prisoners in their home for being sick. At first, people whispered about their visions. "I saw something," someone would say, "in the soup." Then louder, the flames danced in the shape of a dove, or an angel. Milda claimed her goat growl, something sounded like Latin, but she didn't tell anyone. Plague-flavored witch trial was something no one asked for at that time. Thamlin said he dreamt of an angel who told him to eat more legumes. Could it be the solution to death and suffering? Bertha saw a shadowy figure by the old mill, who silently handed her a mushroom and vanished into the fog. She kept the mushroom. It later glowed, possibly divine, possibly mold. And so the villagers leaned in. They held candlelit gatherings at twilight. They hummed, they chanted. One man tried to harmonize with a bee and was gently escorted home. They created rituals. They waved herbs in circles. They drew symbols in flour. They recited protective verses that mostly rhymed, except when they didn't. Some believed, others didn't. But belief wasn't the point. The point was that it felt like doing something. Anything, in a world full of nothing. Brother Thomlin, ever the chronicler, wrote a treatise titled Faith Under Fungus, Coping with Catastrophe Through Creative Devotion. It was 78 pages long, half of which were drawings of saints performing questionable miracles. One included Saint Tilda, the tolerant, turning vinegar into soup, and another showed Saint Gervas blessing a leaking roof. It was not approved by the church. And yet, even as they clung to rituals and invented relics, the villagers remained deeply human in their faith. They argued over who had the most devout prayers by the death count of their family. They bickered about whether lighting 7 candles was holier than 8. They couldn't risk getting cursed again. They once debated for an entire afternoon whether the divine preferred lavender or mint. Brother Matthias, overhearing the argument, dramatically flung his arms wide and declared, "The Lord prefers rosemary." He was immediately challenged to a herb-scented duel. No one won. But the chapel smelled incredible for a week. In time, the acts of faith began merging with acts of survival. Blessings were muttered over bread before it was eaten. Lanterns were lit with whispered psalms. The well was anointed with salt water and hope. Even the cat received a small embroidered robe and a title, Archdeacon Whiskers. It clawed a hymnal and was promptly promoted to bishop. They didn't stop the plague, but they did make people hope. And somehow, in the haze of smoke and prayer and unlicensed sainthood, the village found itself, if not healed, and at least held together, by faith and fermented beverages. By the time the 6th week rolled around, people had gotten oddly picky about what they were willing to let go of, and what they simply could not bear to part with. Not loved ones, not memories, objects. Yes, items. Bertha kept an old spoon. Not because it was particularly useful. It was slightly bent, smelled vaguely of onions, and once got stuck in a jug for 3 days. But it had belonged to her grandmother, who had used it to stir everything from stews to gossip. So she kept it tucked in her apron like a holy relic. Sir Hugh insisted on preserving a decorative goblet made of bone. It wasn't anyone he knew, he claimed. Probably dear. Probably. It was hideous and loud and clinked dramatically every time he moved, but it made him feel like a knight, or at least someone who might be invited to dinner somewhere other than Milda's judgmental table. The children started hoarding pebbles, but not just any pebbles, ones with unusual shapes or odd colors, or that vaguely resembled small animals. One girl swore hers looked like a hedgehog with indigestion. Milda, for reasons never fully explained, saved shoes. Not pairs. Just one of each. She said it reminded her of all the journeys interrupted. Brother Thomlin saved quills. Dozens of them. He claimed each one had written something either mildly profound or impressively stupid, and that was worth remembering. He even started naming them. His favorite, a particularly splotchy feather from an unusually large duck, was named Geraldine. Saving things became a new ritual, not practical things. No one clung to the bucket with the hole or the rake missing its teeth. Instead, it was the oddly sentimental, the cracked plate with a sun design, the blanket with one perfect patch, the broken mug that had once belonged to someone whose laugh had sounded like a seagull. These became anchors. It was as if holding on to one small strange object made the chaos feel ever so slightly less chaotic. Like the universe couldn't fully unravel, as long as you still had your goose-shaped candle holder. Bertha created a shrine in her cupboard, not for saints, but for spoons. Every day she dusted them. Every week she talked to them. Every month she gave them a performance review. Spoon number 3 was demoted for looking too smug. Sir Hugh built what he called the Cabinet of the Noble Past. It was actually a wooden crate with a curtain stapled to it. Inside, his goblet, a cracked mirror, a dried-up inkpot, and what might have once been a hat. He gave tours, charged a pebble as admission. Children lined up. Milda tried to shut him down. He awarded her a lifetime membership. The pig, because of course, had started burying things. Old boots, a ladle, once, regrettably, the chapel keys. Faith was briefly paused until someone remembered they'd left a window open. And then there was Clement. Silent, solemn brother Clement. He saved paper, not books. Not scrolls, just bits of paper. Wrappers, fragments, old receipts for barley and candles. No one knew why. When asked, he said, "They remind me that we used to plan." Planning had become almost scandalous. You could hope, yes. You could pray. You could dream vague dreams of one day seeing the sea or eating a pear that hadn't been partially pre-chewed by a beetle. But plans? Those were fragile things, easily shattered. Especially during the times when you have to check your armpits for buboes and don't know if you will live another day or see your loved ones again. The sick didn't get any better. They just died. So the saved things became placeholders. One woman began saving dried flower petals in a jar labeled "Next Spring." Thomlin wrote plans on his scraps of paper and burned them after reading them aloud. A ritual. A dare. Bertha stitched a quilt from old clothes and titled it "When This Is Over." Sir Hugh declared Tuesday's Future Day, during which one was allowed to discuss dreams aloud. He enforced it with a dramatic cape and a brass bell. The cape was a curtain. The bell had once belonged to a goat. It didn't matter. People came. They sat in a circle. The entire village residents could form a circle in the church's garden now. They drank weak tea. They whispered, "I'll plant tomatoes. I'll build a better bench. I'll propose to Marta, assuming she's still mad at me. I'll bake a cake with every berry in the forest." The cake plan got a round of applause. Even the pig grunted approvingly. And so, though they saved things that seemed small or odd or slightly ridiculous, the truth was they were saving themselves. It began with something so simple, so astonishingly rare, that no one quite knew how to react. Sunlight. Actual, unfiltered, unapologetic sunlight. It spilled across the thatched roofs like golden soup and poked through the clouds as if God had remembered, belatedly, to switch on the scenery. Bertha stepped out of her cottage, blinked, and declared it was warm enough to air out the quilt. This, in village terms, was the equivalent of a national holiday. Children ran around without cloaks. The pig wandered in visible confusion, clearly suspicious of the pleasant temperature. Milda put on her shawl. Brother Thomlin emerged carrying a chair and a journal. He sat under a tree and announced, "If the end is nigh, I shall face it seated." There was no proclamation, no healing miracle, no sudden news that the plague had packed up and gone south for the season. But there was bread that didn't taste like fear. There were birds actually chirping instead of ominously glaring. Bertha's oven lit on the first try. Sir Hugh found a patch of wild garlic and tried to knight it. No one stopped him. Milda hummed. Just once. It was brief. But it happened. And the children built a fort from discarded baskets and declared it a castle, complete with a moat made of pessimism and pebbles. They didn't say it out loud. No one dared, but the day felt survivable. People smiled. Not big smiles, not careless ones, but real, careful smiles. The kind you wear when you're not entirely sure the world won't smack you for it. The goat didn't escape. The firewood didn't smoke. Brother Clement brewed something that was either tea or salvation. And for the first time in weeks, someone sneezed, and nobody ran. Instead, they just looked over, waited, and when nothing happened, resumed knitting or mending or lightly judging the goat. Foundland wrote a poem. Today was not worse, and that alone is a verse. We stitched, we stirred, we stood, and if not better, we were good. It was not his best work, but it made Bertha cry. She blamed the sunlight, and maybe the onion in her pocket. The pig took a nap, a deep, untroubled one, right in the middle of the square, in the middle of the village, showing his belly to the sun. No one moved it. He was basically like a cat from Istanbul, sleeping carelessly and make people comply. They simply walked around, quietly, gently, as if not to disturb whatever spell had made this day just slightly better than the last. Even Brother Matthias, usually given to dramatic declarations and at least one sermon per hour, said nothing all morning. He simply stood outside with his face turned upward like a sunflower with theological training. When someone asked what he was thinking, he replied, "I forgot what warm air felt like. It's unsettling. I rather like it." Bertha offered him a scone. It was a little burnt. She said that made it holy. The pig agreed. And then something remarkable happened. A cart rolled into the village, not full of bad news or more coughs, but apples. Real apples, some bruised, some grumpy-looking, but apples. There was stunned silence, then a cheer. Then someone hugged the cart. It turned out the apples had come from a nearby hamlet where people had started getting better. Not many, but a few. Enough to inspire a little trading again. Enough to inspire hope. Bertha promptly baked a pie. Sir Hugh held a solemn knighting ceremony for the pie. Meilda allowed herself 1 full minute of optimism. And Foundland wrote another poem. Hope returned in apple skin, wrapped in bruises, tart and thin. We bit, we wept, we baked, we ate. A slightly better twist of fate. It was not worse. And that was enough. And so, dear friend, if you're still awake, or perhaps drifting somewhere softly between then and now, we've reached the end. Not the end of everything, of course. Just this tale. A tale of coughs, buboes, funerals and candles, goats and grief, spoons and saints, and slightly better days. It wasn't always heroic. It wasn't always wise. It wasn't always fair. But it was real. People lived and feared and failed and hoped. Sometimes all in the same hour. They mourned with grief, healed with laughter. They prayed with hope and desperation, expected with faith. They survived with pie, with badass bird doctors and solidarity. And maybe that's what the plague left behind more than anything else. Not just loss, but the absurd, gentle, stubborn will to keep going. To make tea, to sing anyway. To knit socks in the shadow of catastrophe and name your pig bishop. Because life always prevails. So wherever you are, under blankets or under stars, remember that history is not just what happened. It's what was felt, what was carried, what was saved, and what it teach us. And sometimes, what was slightly burned in Bertha's oven. There will always be storms. And there will always be sunlight that breaks through, warm and golden, and just a bit unexpected. There will always be someone, perhaps you, stirring soup, humming softly, making tomorrow a little more possible. So, the next time you see a doctor who actually has some medical knowledge, remember the courage and will of the plague doctors to help. Remember the priests trying to maintain the hope. Remember the undertakers who was the last to see someone's loved one, and eventually fell to the ground themselves. Remember the ordinary people, the peasants, the widows, the children, the elders, the men and the women, whose name is long forgotten, who overcame the plague and the hardship of life itself. Also, the neighbor's gossip and the stubbornness of the donkeys. Because remembering is honoring their memory, and they deserve it. So sleep well, noble dreamer. You've walked the dusty roads of history tonight. You've smelled the turnips, judged the goat, and maybe just maybe seen something of yourself in a spoon or a pie or a hopeful patch of sky. You've kept company with the living and the long gone. And somehow, even in their absurdity and sorrow, they've kept company with you. The plague came and passed, as all things do, but the stories remained. And now, so have you. Good night, fellow wanderer. Rest gently, and may your goat stay exactly where you left it.